Alright, so time's up. Let's review. Now, the whole week, what we're doing is learning how to graph linear equations. There's 3 different ways we learn how to graph here in this class. So I'm going to teach you all 3, and that's what you're going to be practicing all week. Graphing. So the first method is graphing using the x and the y intercepts. Now before we do that, let's mark a dot right on the y-axis, because a y-intercept means the line goes through that dot. Now, if we write down the coordinates to this point, that would be 0, 5. So that tells you, if I plug in a 0 for x, I should get 5. So this is the concept that we're going to use on this section. So let's start with number 1 here. On number 1, first let's find the y-intercept. I always like to do that one first. To find the y-intercept, you plug in 0 for x. So here, wherever you see x, you can plug in a 0 instead. 4 times 0 plus 5y equals 20. Now anything times 0 is 0, so it disappears. So all I have left is 5y equals 20. Let's solve for y there. Divide both sides by what? By 5. So that gives me y equals 4. That means my y-intercept is 4. So I put a dot right there. Now I do the same thing, but instead of plugging in a 0 for x, I want to find the x-intercept. So I need to plug in a 0 for y. So we write the same equation down, but wherever the y goes, we're going to put a 0 instead. Now look what happens again. 5 times 0 is 0. It disappears. So what we have is 4x equals 20. You divide both sides by the coefficient, and we get x equals positive 5. That means on the x-axis, you mark positive 5. What can you draw if you have 2 dots? A line. Done. We graphed it. Does that make sense? Now look at the second one. Now, instead of plugging in a 0 and erasing it, and then plugging in a 0 here and erasing it, I'm going to do it from the beginning. If I plug in a 0 for x here, what's going to happen to 2x? It's going to disappear. So what's left is y equals 2. So we already did that one without any work. Now, we write the equation down again, but instead of y, it's 0, which means it disappears. What's left? 2x equals 2. Let's solve that. Divide both sides by 2, and you get x equals positive 1. That means on the x-axis, you just mark positive 1. Now that I have 2 dots, draw my line. So far, so good? Any questions on that one? Now look at the last one. To find the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So we have 2 times 0 minus y equals negative 4. 2 times 0 is 0. So what we're left with is negative y equals negative 4. Now the y is not by itself. You have to divide both sides by the coefficient. If there's a negative next to it, then you're dividing by negative 1 on both sides. That gives you y equals positive 4. That would be the y-intercept. And now you plug in a 0 for y. 2x minus 0 equals negative 4. Minus 0 disappears. So you're left with 2x equals negative 4. Divide both sides by 2, and you get x equals negative 2. That means on the x-axis, you're marking negative 2. Once you have 2 dots, draw your line. want you to try these on your own. 1 and 2 are just like what you did. But number 3, I've shown you how these graphs look before. So try to remember how these graphs should look. I'm going to remind you anyways when I review it. So go ahead and try these on your own. Alright, eyes up here. So on the first one, you could technically plug in a 0 here for x. But instead, let's just erase the x and write down negative 3y equals 6 and solve it. What's the only step I gotta do? Divide both sides by negative 3. I get y equals negative 2. So on the y-axis, I mark negative 2. Now I do the same thing but the other way around. Instead of erasing 2x, I'm going to erase 3y. So what I have is 2x equals 6. Divide by 2 on both sides. And you get x equals positive 3. So on the x-axis, you mark positive 3. Once you have 2 dots, you can draw your line. On IXL, you're going to get really good at this because you get back-to-back practice. But it's not hard. As you can see, cover a letter, solve, cover a letter, solve. Now the next one. Let's already write both equations that we're solving. If I cover the x, then I'm solving 6y equals 24. If I cover the y, then I'm solving 4x equals 24. Let's solve both these equations. Divide both sides by 6 on this one. You get y equals 4. So positive 4 is the y-intercept. Now we do the same thing here, but we're solving for x. Divide by 4 on both sides. X equals positive 6. So on the x-axis, you mark positive 6. Once you got 2 dots, you can draw your line going through those 2 dots, and you're done. You grab it. So far, so good. Any questions? Now, this right here is very important. X equals 2, y equals negative 4. So, pay very close attention to this part. This is important. We've talked about this before. If you have y equals a number and the x is not there, it's missing, then that line is a horizontal line that touches what number? Negative 4. So you go to y, negative 4, which is right here, and you just draw a horizontal line there. Done. I did the red equation. Now let's do the other one in pink so you don't get them confused. The other one says x equals 2. That's the opposite. If the y is missing, it's a vertical line that touches 2. So you go to the x-axis, go to 2, and draw a vertical line. Done. I graphed both of those lines. This is very important, so make sure you know that. When the y is missing, vertical line. When the x is missing, horizontal line. Alright, let's move over. Now, this is the second way that we're going to learn how to graph in here. This is called graphing using a table, or graphing by creating a table. So I got all the tables here for you. Now watch. Over here, all you're going to do, similar to what we did on the previous one, but here, we're not just going to plug in a 0. We're going to make up numbers here on the x column. Now, what number should you put there? Here's what I recommend. If there's no fraction, like on these two, then you're going to put these numbers every time. 0, 1, 2, negative 1, negative 2. This one, since there's no fractions here, also 0, 1, 2, negative 1, negative 2. You with me? Now, all you have to do is plug in for x the number you're looking at. So 2 times 0 plus 3 equals 3. Now you do it with the 1. 2 times 1 plus 3 equals 5. 2 times 2 plus 3 equals 7. 2 times negative 1 plus 3 equals positive 1. And 2 times negative 2 plus 3 equals negative 1. Now you just plot those 5 points. 0, 3, 1, 5, 2, 7, negative 1, 1, negative 2, negative 1. Doesn't that create a straight line with all 5 dots? So just draw a line straight through your 5 dots. That's another way of graphing it. So let's say you forgot the method I taught you about the x and y intercepts. Who cares? You can always do this and get the same line. So now look at the next one here. We're going to plug it in. Negative 3 times 0 plus 2. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. Now we do the same thing for all the other numbers. Negative 3 times 1 plus 2 is negative 1. Negative 3 times 2 plus 2 is negative 4. Negative 3 times negative 1 plus 2 is positive 5. And negative 3 times negative 2 plus 2 is positive 8. So now, plot those 5 points. 0, 2, 1, negative 1, 2, negative 4, negative 1, 5, negative 2, 8. Doesn't that create a straight line with my 5 dots? Yes, it does. So draw a line going through all your dots. You with me so far? Now, this is where it gets different. And it's not very different. It's just different in terms of what numbers you put here. Right? If I put the number 1 in here, and I solve, it's going to give me a decimal. Decimals are very hard to graph. So I recommend, whenever there's a fraction, make sure every number in here is a multiple of that denominator. So the first one could be 0, but you're not going to put 1. You have to go 2, 4, 6, 8, or negative 2, negative 4. Because it has to be a multiple of the denominator. If you do that, you won't get fractions. And you don't want to graph fractions, trust me. So now we go 0, plug it in. 1/2 times 0 plus 2 is 2. 1/2 times 2 is 1. And 1 plus 2 equals 3. 1/2 times 4 is 2. And 2 plus 2, 4. 1/2 times negative 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 2, positive 1. And the last one, negative 4 times 1/2 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2, 0. Now, before I plot those points, can anyone tell me what the y-intercept is for this equation? Without graphing it, just looking at the table, who can tell me what the y-intercept is? Anyone? I'll wait.
2.
What?
2.
0, 2. Very good. And what's the x-intercept? If you figured out the y-intercept, then you should be able to figure out the x-intercept by looking at that chart, at the table.
2, 3.
What?
2, 3.
No, to find the x-intercept, what do you plug in for y? You plug in 0. Which one of these points has a 0 for y?
Negative.
Negative 4, 0. That. is your x-intercept. Whenever the 0 is on the x, that number is your y-intercept. Whenever this 0 is on the y, the other number is your x-intercept. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Alright, so when you plot them, draw the line. You can skip that because we already plotted 5 points on the other 2 questions. Alright, so this is what I want. I want you to try these 3 on your own. Same exact thing we just did. Create the table. But before you do that, let's fill in the numbers that go in here by ourselves first, at least for the first 2. So for the first one, is there a fraction here? No. That means I can use 0, 1, 2, -1, -2. Small, easy numbers to use. Is there a fraction on the second one? Yes. What's the denominator of that fraction?
3.
3. So we're going to use 0, 3, 6, -3, -6. Now go ahead and do it. Do 1 and 2 on your own. And if you remember, do number 3 on your own. I'll give you 5 minutes for that one. Let me pause. Alright, so on the first one, you're plugging in the 0x value that we put here as the first number in the x column. So we plug it in for x because it's on the x column. -5 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus 2 is 2. Now we do the same thing for all the other numbers. -5 times 1 plus 2 would be -3. Now we go -5 times 2 plus 2 would be -7. Now we have -5 times -1 plus 2, which is +7. And then -5 times -2 is +10. Plus 2 is +12. So now all you see, you can't graph the last one because it doesn't fit on your grid. It's okay. With 4 points, it's more than enough to draw a line because all you need is 2. So 0, 2, 1, -3, 2, -7. Already I got 3 dots that I can use to draw my line. On the second one, we couldn't use 0, 1, 2, -1, -2 because it gives us decimals. So if you use numbers that are multiples of your denominator, you'll never get fractions. So now we got 2/3 times 0 plus 1 is 1. 2/3 times 3 plus 1 is 3. 2/3 times 6 plus 1 is 5. You get -1 to the next one, and -3 for the next one. So you just plot those 5 points, 0, 1, 3, 3, 6, 5, -3, -1, and -6, -3. Obviously, if you're graphing this and one of your points lands like somewhere else, you made a mistake on the calculations. It should give you a straight line. Now, this is kind of what I showed you on the last one, on the previous section of the x and y intercepts. But I want to show you how it looks in the table, right? First, let's do y equals -4. If somebody tells you y equals -4, what are you going to put for all the y values? -4. Because it says y is -4, that means there can't be any other number on the y except -4. Now put your numbers on the x. 0, 1, 2, -1, -2. If you plot that, you get a horizontal line. Now on that same graph, I'm going to choose blue, and I'm going to do x right, it doesn't matter. 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. If I plot those points, it's just going to give me a bunch of points on this vertical line. Any questions on this one? The next one. This is the main section. Now, why do I say main? Because this is the method that you're going to use the most. So, the 3 methods I taught you, this is the one you're going to use the most. And it's also the easiest one to do. On all the other ones, you have to calculate stuff. With the calculator or with your mind, you still have to calculate stuff. Here, you don't have to calculate anything. This number right here is your y-intercept. So you mark -5 on the y-axis. And now you use a slope, which is 2 over 1, to rise 2 and run 1. Once you have your 2 dots, you can draw your line. So this number is m, which is your slope. This number is b, which is your y-intercept. So on the y-axis, for number 2, what dot am I going to mark first?
2.
2. So we go to +2, and now my slope is 3 over 4, would mean up 3 boxes and right 4. Once I have 2 dots, I can draw my line. So far so good on those? Now the last one. -1 is the y-intercept. So first we put a dot on -1, and now the slope is -2 over 3. On these, it was up and right, because it was a positive number on top and a positive number on the bottom. But in this case, it's a negative on top. So that just means this is going to be down and then right. So from that dot we made, we go down 2 boxes, right 3 boxes. We stop and we put a dot. Now we can connect our dots all the way through our graph, and we graph the line. Any questions on that? Again, I'm going to give you 3 right now to practice just like this. Look how quick we did this. So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes to do this, because it takes a couple seconds for each. Here's the ones that you're going to do on your own. You use the y-intercept, which is a constant, +2, to mark the y-axis. So you go to the y-axis, go to +2, put a dot. And now use a slope, which is -1 over 10, to go down 1, right 10. Done. This is all you do. So here you got -1 as the y-intercept. You mark -1 on the y-axis. 7 is 7 over 1. So you go up 7, right 1. All you do, this is how you graph it. This is the method you're going to use the most. Last one. +5 is the y-intercept, because it's constant. The slope is -6 over 1, which is down 6, right 1. Clear? It's pretty simple. You'll get the hang of it when you get to ISL and practice, obviously. But this worksheet has 2 or 3 questions from each. Alright, so let me put it on Google Classroom. In the meantime, here's the worksheet. This is what it's going to look like. So the first 3 questions are graphing using the x and y intercepts. The first thing I taught you today. The next 3 questions, you just have to make a table and graph all the points in your table. And then on the last section, 7 through 12, you just have to graph the y-intercept. So for example, +5, and then up 6, right 5. Since that doesn't land on your graph, put a negative on both and go down 6, left